Pets are often seen as sources of comfort and affection, but what happens when your pet is a predator, an animal whose instincts are rooted in the wild? In an instant, that safety can vanish, replaced by something far darker. This was Kellyanne Waltz's reality. The bond she shared with her black bear Teddy was one of trust and affection. Yet, in a flash, that bond shattered. Teddy, once docile, unleashed the savage power of his untamed nature, and Kellyanne's world was plunged into chaos. It was October 4th, 2009, and the air was crisp in Ross Township, Pennsylvania, as the morning sun filtered through the trees. On a hilltop property, Kellyanne and Michael Waltz went about their usual routines, surrounded by their collection of exotic animals. For over 15 years, the couple had been licensed keepers of creatures most would only see in the wild: lions, tigers, leopards, and a towering black bear named Teddy. Their neighbors admired the family's dedication, often stopping to catch a glimpse of the animals from a safe distance. Yet, even with years of experience, the question lingered. What happens when years of familiarity meet the untamed instincts of a wild predator? Teddy was an enormous presence, standing over 6 feet tall when on his hind legs. Despite his immense size and power, he seemed gentle, even playful. His favorite treat was popcorn, and he often greeted Kellyanne with an eager growl as she approached his 15 by 15 foot enclosure. For Kellyanne, Teddy was more than just an exotic pet. He symbolized her lifelong passion for animals. But that passion would soon take a dark turn. Kellyanne's love for wildlife began in her youth as a competitive rider and member of the 4-H club in Massachusetts. Her dedication to animal care continued into adulthood, where she became a licensed exotic animal keeper alongside her husband Michael. Together, they earned their license in 1994. Creating a sanctuary-like property housing lions, tigers, leopards, and servals. Despite the inherent risks, Kellyanne treated these creatures with meticulous care and respect, ensuring that every enclosure met or exceeded safety standards. In addition to her work with animals, Kellyanne was an active member of her community. She volunteered at the Faith Christian School in Roseto, where her children attended, balancing her devotion to her family, her faith, and her passion for exotic animal care. Neighbors frequently praised the couple's commitment to safety, noting the well-maintained cages and the apparent harmony between the Walls family and their animals. Kellyanne's confidence in her routine was supported by her years of experience. She had raised Teddy from a cub and maintained a structured relationship with him. Yet, as autumn settled in and the bear's instincts heightened, subtle warning signs began to emerge. That Sunday began like any other. Kellyanne, accompanied by her children, prepared to clean the cages and feed the animals. Her neighbor Scott was outside with his children, casually greeting her across the yard. As usual, Kellyanne headed to Teddy's cage first, wheelbarrow and shovel in hand. Her method was simple: distract Teddy with food while she worked. Tossing a pile of dog food to one corner of the cage, she watched as the bear eagerly devoured his meal. With the animal preoccupied, Kellyanne entered the enclosure to begin cleaning. Relying on routine and a quick distraction proved to be a deadly mistake. As Kellyanne turned to wheel out the waste, Teddy shifted his attention. In one swift motion, the 350-pound bear lunged. His weight slammed into her and his jaws clamped onto her shoulder with incredible force. Her children, still on the porch, screamed as the attack unfolded. Scott, hearing the commotion, ran to his house to grab his firearm. In the few moments it took him to return, Teddy had already inflicted catastrophic injuries. Kellyanne's efforts to resist were no match for the bear's strength, and she lay motionless by the time Scott arrived. Scott fired his first shot, hitting Teddy in the abdomen. The bear recoiled but remained standing, now focused on Scott. A second shot struck the bear's neck, forcing him to collapse. Even then, Scott fired additional rounds to ensure the bear was no longer a threat. When emergency responders arrived, the scene was one of devastation. Kellyanne's lifeless body lay inside Teddy's enclosure, the evidence of the attack unmistakable. Despite the responders' swift arrival, there was nothing they could do. She was pronounced dead at the scene. Teddy, too, had succumbed to the wounds he received, and his 350-pound body was a sobering display of the fine line between instinct and training. The attack raised immediate questions. Why was there no secondary barrier to separate Teddy during cleaning? How had the bear's growing agitation gone unnoticed? Despite being raised in captivity, Teddy's instincts as a wild animal had surfaced with devastating consequences. The Walls property had been considered safe, but was compliance with regulations enough to ensure safety? News of the incident spread quickly. Kellyanne was remembered as a dedicated caretaker, but scrutiny fell on the family's practices. Michael's license to house exotic animals had expired the previous year, adding another layer of complexity to the situation. Neighbors defended the family's intentions and practices, but experts pointed to the unpredictable nature of wild animals as the core issue. If regulations aren't enough to prevent these catastrophes, what is? The tragedy showed that no matter how long an animal is kept in captivity, its instincts remain. Kellyanne's story made clear the need for stricter safety measures and reinforced the dangers of treating wild predators as domesticated companions. Is it possible to truly coexist with creatures whose natural instincts are so powerful? What if the animals aren't just contained in rural enclosures, but instead roam freely within the walls of a city apartment? Our next story takes us to Newark, Delaware, where Ronald Huff's obsession with his 7 monitor lizards resulted in a bloody scene that left authorities in shock. It was January 16, 2002, a cold winter day in Newark, Delaware, when neighbors in the Ridgewood Manor apartments noticed something unusual. A foul, putrid odor seeped through the walls of Ronald Huff's apartment, creeping into the neighbors' units. It was the kind of smell no one could ignore, the unmistakable stench of decay. Concerned, Ronald's neighbor, Jeff Wong, decided to investigate. What began as a simple inquiry soon turned into a horrifying discovery. Ronald Huff, 42 years old, was a man defined by his discipline and unique passions. A former soldier with a structured background, he lived alone in a small apartment in Newark, Delaware. But he was never without company. His companions were 7 Nile monitor lizards, giant prehistoric-looking reptiles that he adored. These creatures, some as long as 6 feet, roamed freely through his home. For Ronald, they weren't pets, they were his family. Known to his co-workers as Lizard Boy, Ronald's fascination with these reptiles was a defining part of his life. He frequently shared stories about his lizards at work, proudly displaying the scratches and minor bites he'd received while handling them. His colleagues knew him as a quiet yet enthusiastic individual, entirely devoted to his unusual companions. But beyond his workplace and his lizard collection, Ronald's interactions seemed limited. His focus remained on his pets and his solitary lifestyle. The lizards, resembling smaller Komodo dragons, were fearsome predators in the wild, known for their razor-sharp teeth, venomous bites, and predatory instincts. Ronald, however, treated them with affection, raising them from juveniles and allowing them to roam unrestricted. They slithered through his kitchen, lounged in his bedroom, and even ate at his dining room table. This coexistence, while fascinating, masked a darker reality. No matter how much Ronald cared for them, these animals were still wild at heart. Their behavior could turn unpredictable in an instant, as he would soon tragically discover. No one knows exactly what transpired in the days leading up to January 16th, but Ronald had not been seen for several days. His absence raised concern among neighbors, especially as a foul odor began emanating from his apartment. The stench, unmistakable as that of rotting flesh, suggested that something had gone terribly wrong. Though the exact details of Ronald's final moments may never be known, the grim scene discovered days later sent ripples of shock through the community. On that day, officers forced their way into Ronald's apartment and were immediately overwhelmed by the scene. The stench in the air was thick and suffocating, forcing the responders to cover their faces as they stepped inside. The dimly lit apartment was cluttered with furniture pushed against the walls to make room for the reptiles. In the middle of the room lay Ronald's body slumped against the door. His once recognizable features were horribly disfigured, with deep wounds covering his arms, legs, and torso. Large portions of flesh had been stripped away, exposing bone and sinew. The 7 Nile monitor lizards were still present, their snouts stained red with blood. They hissed and flicked their forked tongues at the officers, unperturbed by the commotion. The floor around Ronald was littered with scattered debris, bits of raw chicken, remnants of cockroach shells, which were a common food for the lizards, and overturned furniture, all signs of a chaotic and violent scene. Feeding time was often chaotic. Monitor lizards are highly reactive to routine stimuli, and any delay could have heightened their impatience. A single bite from their sharp teeth, combined with venom that causes pain, swelling, and infection, could have incapacitated Ronald. The lizards themselves showed no signs of fear. One of the larger animals stood near Ronald's body, towering over the bloody scene, while others darted across the room, their quick movements keeping the officers on guard. Their powerful tails swept through the debris, and their claws scratched against the hardwood floor. To the officers, the reptiles seemed to be guarding their territory, ready to defend their kill. It took time for wildlife officials to arrive and secure the lizards. The largest and most aggressive among them resisted capture, forcing the team to use specialized equipment to subdue it. The animals were eventually removed, but the haunting image of the scene lingered with those who witnessed it. Ronald's body was taken for examination, but the extent of the injuries made it impossible to determine an exact cause of death. Large portions of flesh were missing from his arms and legs, consistent with bite marks from the monitor lizard's sharp teeth. Deep lacerations marred his torso, and his face was nearly unrecognizable, with sections of skin and muscle torn away, exposing underlying bone. The injuries suggested prolonged interaction with the lizards, either during an attack or as part of post-mortem scavenging. His hands and fingers showed signs of defensive wounds, implying a struggle may have occurred. Investigators noted claw marks on his limbs and chest, likely caused by the reptiles climbing or restraining him. The autopsy revealed no signs of toxins or foreign substances that might have incapacitated him, but it was clear that his injuries were severe enough to have been fatal if inflicted while he was still alive. The damage to his body, coupled with the chaotic scene of the apartment, painted a gruesome picture. Whether Ronald succumbed to the lizard's aggression or they scavenged his body after a natural death remained unclear. What was certain, however, was that his remains bore the unmistakable imprint of the powerful and untamed creatures he had raised as companions. The grim reality of Ronald Huff's fate showed the deadly risks of keeping exotic pets behind closed doors. But what happens when the cage doors are thrown open? In Ohio, one man unleashed a wave of chaos, setting loose lions, tigers, and bears to prowl through the night. The result was carnage unlike anything the nation had ever seen. Terry Thompson was a man whose final act unleashed a blood-soaked nightmare as roaring predators tore across the land, leaving destruction and fear in their wake. Viewer discretion is advised. This story includes the most horrific details ever discussed in an animal attack. As the sun set over the quiet town of Zanesville, Ohio on October 18, 2011, no one could have imagined the terror that was about to unfold. Terry Thompson, a 62-year-old Vietnam War veteran, was a man drawn to the extraordinary. His passion for collecting exotic animals began in 1977, when he purchased a lion cub for his wife Marianne. Over the years, his collection grew to include tigers, lions, bears, wolves, and even baboons, housed on his 73-acre property. The animals were a spectacle for neighbors, but their living conditions often raised concerns. Reports of inadequate cages and unsafe fencing became common. Neighbors complained of escapes, and law enforcement was called on multiple occasions. Yet, Ohio's lax laws allowed Terry to continue amassing animals without any significant restrictions. By 2011, his property was home to 56 exotic creatures, many kept in overcrowded and unsanitary conditions. In 2008, Terry was convicted on federal firearms charges and served a year in prison. His time behind bars strained his finances and his mental health. He grew paranoid, believing his wife had been unfaithful during his incarceration. After his release, this combination of personal turmoil and mounting pressure would culminate in an act of unthinkable destruction. As twilight fell on Zanesville on that October day, neighbors began to notice strange occurrences on Terry Thompson's sprawling property. Horses in the nearby paddocks, usually calm and grazing, were unusually agitated. They snorted loudly, pacing back and forth with unease. Their frantic behavior caught the attention of Terry's neighbor, Sam Kopchak, who decided to investigate. Kopchak was an experienced horse owner, but even he felt a creeping sense of dread as he approached the paddock. When Sam reached his own horse, a mare named Red, he saw the source of the animal's distress: a massive black bear lumbering through the field. The sight was startling but not entirely unheard of in rural Ohio. However, as Kopchak moved closer, he spotted something that froze him in his tracks: a fully grown African lion. The male lion stood just beyond the paddock fence, its golden mane catching the dim light, its piercing eyes fixed on him. The fence separating them seemed inadequate against the size and power of the predator. Realizing the imminent danger, Kopchak quickly led Red into the barn and locked the doors behind him. Inside the barn, with his heart pounding, he called 911 to report the sighting. The call was the first of many as chaos began to spread throughout the area. Unbeknownst to his neighbors, Terry Thompson had spent the hours before orchestrating the unthinkable. Using wire cutters, he methodically opened the enclosures of 50 of his exotic animals, releasing lions, tigers, wolves, and bears onto his property. To ensure the predators ventured out of their cages, Terry scattered raw chicken around the grounds, a final act of calculated chaos. What could drive a man to such a drastic act? Whatever the motive, Terry had unleashed a nightmare on the small town of Zanesville. After setting the animals loose, Terry walked to the front yard of his home armed with a handgun. He raised the weapon to himself and pulled the trigger, ending his life in the middle of the chaos he had created. When officers arrived hours later, they found his body on the lawn, partially consumed by one of his own tigers. While Kopchak remained barricaded in his barn, the chaos outside grew more terrifying by the second. Through the small, dusty windows, he watched as more predators appeared from the shadows. Wolves sprinted across the field, their eyes glowing in the dim light. A massive tiger, its powerful muscles rippling beneath its striped coat, stalked through the tall grass. Then a lioness emerged, her gaze fixed on the paddock as though scanning for prey. Inside the barn, the air was thick with tension. Kopchak knew the flimsy wooden doors were no match for the powerful creatures roaming just feet away. He held his breath, his pulse pounding in his ears as he tried to stay as silent as possible. Speaking as quietly as he could, Kopchak finally placed his 911 call. His words were frantic and urgent, painting a chilling picture of the nightmare outside. At the same time, emergency calls from across Zanesville came pouring in. Predators freely roamed the town, causing chaos and destruction. A soccer coach a mile from Terry's property reported a tiger near the edge of a practice field, prompting parents to evacuate their children. Elsewhere, a motorist narrowly avoided a collision with a black bear. When officers arrived at Terry's property, they found enclosures wide open and predators roaming freely. Lions and tigers lingered near the driveway, while bears and wolves ventured closer to neighboring homes. The danger was spreading rapidly into residential areas, and officers had no choice but to act. Tranquilizers were unavailable, a grim reality that left officers with few options. Wildlife tranquilizer guns, typically used by specialists, were not a part of standard police equipment. Even if they had been accessible, the delay in sedative effects and the difficulty of tracking animals in the dark made tranquilization unfeasible. Law enforcement had to prioritize immediate public safety over saving the animals' lives. The order was given to kill any of the wild animals found before they could cause more damage. By morning, the full extent of the devastation was clear. Of the 50 animals released, 48 had been killed, their bodies strewn across fields and roads. The remaining 2, a grizzly bear and a monkey still in cages, were safely removed. Terry's home was found in disarray, reflecting years of neglect and chaos. What caused Terry Thompson to spiral into a complete breakdown? And why did he choose to inflict such gruesome suffering on his community? These questions will linger forever, the answers lost with Terry's tragic death. But the bloodshed in Zanesville was just one case of the nightmare that can result from keeping wild and exotic animals as pets. In South Africa, a young boy was torn apart by a lion that had once been thought tame. The animal's savage attack was quick and brutal, leaving nothing but a broken body and a grisly reminder of the deadly consequences when humans and nature clash. It was April 2017, and 12-year-old Christian Prinsloo, known as Tian to his friends and family, was enjoying his school holiday in the South African countryside. As the 2-week break began, Tian made his way to his grandmother's home near Lefalale, a quiet town on the edge of the Bushveld. It was a time of adventure for him, a chance to escape the routine of everyday life. Little did he know this trip would end in a tragedy that no one could have predicted. Tian's grandmother, Mary Stridham, had a home nestled in the heart of South Africa's wild landscapes. The area was known for its sprawling farms, vast open fields, and the occasional wild animal sighting. Mary had lived there for years, deeply connected to the land and the tight-knit farming community. It was a place where Tian had spent many holidays, surrounded by the peace and beauty of rural life. He enjoyed the quiet days spent exploring the area, reading in the local library, and visiting nearby farms to see the animals. But there was one place Tian particularly loved to visit, a farm where his family friends, the Voss couple, raised lions. They were a quiet but dedicated couple who ran a breeding facility for these majestic and dangerous animals. They kept 3 adult lions, hand-raised but still wild in their instincts. The Voss couple treated the lions with care and respect, making sure their cages and enclosures were secure. The lions were kept in their enclosures, only allowed to roam the property under the watchful eyes of their owners, or so it was believed. It was on this farm that Tian, accompanied by his grandmother, spent an afternoon chatting with the Voss couple. It was a casual visit, one Tian had made many times before. The lions had already been out for their daily walk and had returned to their enclosures by the time Tian and Marie arrived. As the adults spoke over tea, Tian was oblivious to the danger that was about to unfold. The house was bustling with activity. Mary and Mrs. Voss were in the kitchen while Tian moved about looking for his favorite book. What he didn't know was that, unbeknownst to the adults, one of the lions had escaped its enclosure. A gate, left ajar or improperly closed, had given the lion the opportunity it needed. No one realized the danger until it was too late. In the blink of an eye, the massive male lion appeared in the doorway. Tian, already familiar with the lions but never completely naive about their wild nature, froze. He had always been told the same thing. The lions were not tamed despite being raised in captivity. But what could have prepared him for the sight of one of these beasts in the house? Marie saw the lion first and immediately stepped between Tian and the predator, trying to shield her grandson with her own body. The lion, though seemingly calm, locked its eyes on Tian and stepped closer, testing the air. Marie, remaining calm despite the mounting danger, urged Tian to run for safety, but it was too late. Tian turned to flee, and in that split second, the lion sprang into action, covering the distance between them in mere moments. Tian never stood a chance. The lion pounced, its claws digging into Tian's small back, its jaws sinking deep into his flesh. With the speed and force of a wild animal, it took him down to the ground. Tian screamed, but his cries were quickly muffled by the weight of the lion's attack. Marie, with every ounce of strength she had left, lunged at the lion, grabbing its thick mane and pulling with all her might. She screamed, calling for help, but it was a losing battle. The lion swiped at her, raking its claws across her arms and shoulders as she desperately tried to protect her grandson. In the chaos, Mrs. Voss returned to the scene. The lion, momentarily distracted, turned away from Tian. It was a fleeting moment of hope, but the damage was already done. The lion, now subdued by Mrs. Voss, was quickly returned to its enclosure, and she rushed to call for help. Marie, however, did not wait. Despite her own injuries, she grabbed the car keys, tossed them to Mrs. Voss, and picked up Tian. She carried him to the car and sped toward the nearest hospital, knowing time was running out. It took them 20 minutes to reach the hospital, but by the time they arrived, it was clear that Tian's injuries were catastrophic. His back and neck were shredded, his breathing shallow and labored. The doctors did what they could to stabilize him, but it was only a temporary measure. The damage to his spine was severe. Tian was airlifted to Pretoria, where he was transferred to a more equipped facility, but even then, the outlook was grim. For 3 weeks, Tian remained in a coma, his body clinging to life through machines. His parents, Herman and Andre Prinsloo, kept a constant vigil, hoping for a miracle. But the miracle never came. On the 26th of April, just one day after his 12th birthday, Tian passed away. His family was left in a state of shock, mourning the loss of their son, who had been full of life and dreams for the future. Meanwhile, the lion, despite the deadly attack, was not euthanized. The Prinsloo family chose not to press charges against the Voss couple, understanding that the lion had acted on instinct, not malice. They made the difficult decision to allow the lion to be rehomed to another facility where it could live out its life in a more secure environment, far from human interaction. The tragedy of Tian's death was something no one could have foreseen, and despite the loss, the family did not wish to punish the animal. In the end, the Prinsloo family's decision reflected their understanding of the unpredictability of nature. While they mourned their son's loss, they knew that it was a tragic accident, one that no amount of legal action could undo. Tian's life was cut short by a series of misfortunes, but his family chose to honor his love for animals by ensuring the lion would be treated with respect in its new home. Despite their domestication, these creatures are still driven by primal instincts that no amount of care or training can suppress. Nature, in its purest form, remains untamable, and even the most careful decisions can lead to tragic consequences. Thank you for watching these horrifying animal attack stories. Nature's raw power can turn deadly in an instant, as we've seen time and time again. If you're ready for more, our next video takes you to the shocking attack on Maria Fernandez. What was supposed to be a peaceful swim with her daughter quickly turned into a fight for survival when a great white shark appeared right in front of them. What Maria did to protect her daughter was unthinkable. Click to watch this horrific shark attack unfold, and we'll see you there.